Okay. Um, Thank you all for coming. I know it's gorgeous weather outside, and we are here in this also magnificent room, but not quite the outside. On behalf of my colleagues at the Museum Studies program, in particular Deirdre Henneberry, our Associate Director, and Amy Smola, our Admin Assistant, it is my pleasure to welcome all of you this evening. I know you are all eagerly anticipating our visiting scholars presentation, but let me first provide some context of the importance of this event. But let me first begin with a land acknowledgement. The University of Michigan occupies the ancestral, traditional, and current lands of the Anishinaabe people, or people of the Three Fires, namely Ojibwe, Odawa, and Bodewanami nations. These nations were forced to cede their lands in 1817 through the coercive Treaty of the Foot of the Rapids. The treaty earmarked half of the lands for a college in Detroit where indigenous students would be able to receive an education. Despite this commitment, the university did not enroll an indigenous student until 130 years later. And as of 2024, indigenous students represent only 0.16%, or about 82 students, of the UM's population. Additionally, it is the sale of this land that established UM's endowment and helped create and sustain UM as a premier research university. As we continue to occupy this land, we recognize that this acknowledgement does not substitute for the creation of an authentic and sustained relationship with the indigenous communities and their lands that we occupy. Further, this acknowledgement will not erase the harm and violence that have been done to indigenous people through the actions and inactions of this institution. However, through a land acknowledgement, we are taking an important small step towards the creation of an equitable, sustainable, and self-determined future. In offering this land acknowledgement, we recognize and affirm indigenous people and communities who live here now and those who were forcibly removed from their homelands. We also affirm indigenous histories and experiences and the historic and ongoing struggles for indigenous sovereignty. So each spring, since 2007, the Museum Studies program hosts a visiting scholar who is a leading museum practitioner or researcher who spends a week on our campus interacting with students, faculty, and the local and regional museum community. While at the university, the visiting scholar, and this week it's Sebchan, whom I'm introducing today, teaches a session on our graduate pro seminar, meets with student teams to discuss their capstone projects, and schedules one-on-one meetings with interested students and faculty. The visiting scholar also presents an evening public lecture, which is happening tonight, and leads a morning workshop for students, faculty, and local museum professionals. Often, one day of the visit, this week it's going to be Friday, is devoted to visiting a regional and campus museums and conversations with a broad array of local museum professionals. The Visiting Scholar program brings internationally renowned museum practitioners and innovative thinkers to our campus. Their presence serves as a galvanizing force among the local museum communities on topics of shared interest, assures issues of challenging and exciting discussions in our pro seminar, offers expert professional support to our student work, and allows for exciting one-on-one interactions with students, faculty, and practitioners. We are very grateful to the following units of the university for their co-sponsorship for this 2025 Visiting Scholar Residency. The Arts Initiative, the Bentley Historical Library, the College of Literature, Science, and Arts, the Digital Studies Institute, the History of Art Department, Rummage, a Rackham Interdisciplinary Workshop, the School of Information, the University of Michigan Museum of Art, and the university's Office of Research. So now let me introduce Seb. You know, we invited Seb because he is a thought leader, particularly on issues of museums and technology. I have known him for over a decade, at least in my career, because when I started as an academic around 2012 or so, the buzzword at that time was linked open data. At one point, I was told, if you identify 10 people to have a conversation on this issue, who would that be? And of course, on top of my list was Seb. And now, the field is tantalized with issues around AI. And obviously, again, Seb is once again the leading voice in this conversation. I remember last year when consultation with Deirdre and our steering committee and Amy, and I said, the next visiting scholar. And we said it has to be someone who could discuss these issues of technology, particularly in relation to civic engagements, social issues of our time, and social relevance. And when Deirdre recommended and nominated Seb, we said, perfect, we found our person. So for those of you who are here, you probably have heard of Seb Chan and is familiar with his reputation. Nevertheless, I will read his long bio. So Seb Chan is the director and CEO of the Australian Centre for the Moving Image, or ACMI, guiding ACMI as a museum focused on screen culture and the intersection of media, technology, world building, and storytelling. Prior to his appointment to this role, Seb was ACMI's and the museum field's first Chief Experience Officer 2015 to 2022, and was a key part of the team behind ACMI's expansion into a multi-award-winning, multi-platform museum. Prior, his time with ACMI, Seb led the digital transformation of the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum in New York, from its award-winning interactive pen with local projects to the acquisition of important software-based works for the Smithsonian's collection. Beginning his museum career in Sydney, he led the Powerhouse Museum's pioneering work in open access, mass collaboration, and digital experience during the 2000s in Sydney. His work has won awards internationally in the museum, media, and design spheres. Seb is the current national president of the Australian Museums and Galleries Association, serves on the International Advisory Board member of Art Science Museum in Singapore, and is a board member of the nonprofit Tessitura Network. He previously served on the boards of the National Communication Museum, Diversity Arts Australia, ICE Parramatta, and Music New South Wales, and has been an advisor to the National Museum of Australia, National Heritage Board of Singapore, Mellon Foundation's Art Store, and was a member of the Australian government's Gov 2.0 task force. He is an alumnus of the Getty Leadership Institute, Salzburg Global Seminar, University of New South Wales, and was awarded the UNSW Alumni Award for Art and Culture in 2024. So, I'm sure you're very excited to hear from Seb. So without much ado, please give him our world-renowned Midwestern welcome.
Thanks, Isai. Thanks, Ricky. So thanks so much for coming along on such a beautiful, not so warm for Australia, but warmish day. This image is from the Toyota Museum in Nagoya, and an amazing sort of museum. If you're in Japan, and I know lots of people do go there at the moment, Nagoya is kind of awesome if you're a museum person. So hello, and a big thanks to Ricky, Deirdre, and Amy, and the whole University of Michigan team. I too would like to acknowledge the work that I do is on the land of the people of the Kulin Nation in Naarm, also known as Melbourne. That's where I live, work, and create. and I pay my respects to any first peoples here too. The Kulin Nation and the Indigenous people of Australia have been continuous residents of the land for 60,000 years, and they've survived and thrived and transmitted their knowledge since before the last ice age, and there's a lot we can learn from that. Also, I'd like to acknowledge that what I'm going to be speaking about today, as always, my work builds on the work of other people. It builds on the work of current and former teams at many other institutions and lots of agencies and others. And I'm of course part of a big community which you're also part of as museum people. I like to also nowadays say that all contemporary creative practice is communal, and that's a very important thing to come to terms with, and we're all part of an ecology. So this is where I'm from. It's shown set up for the moving image in Melbourne. It's a big state-owned museum in the middle of Melbourne. We get about 1 million, so that's us. I can probably end there. I actually didn't come from the sort of museum world at all. I started my career putting on events and parties, illegal raves, running music things. I started out when the internet was new. My modem was 56K. It made that great connecting sound. That was a long, long time ago, before phones had cameras and cameras had phones. So I also ran Music Press. This is a magazine I ran for many, many years. So I've always come to the museum world and technology with this thought that museums as media. Museums are a form of media, and museums are a communication medium. And that's informed a lot of how I think about things. And of course, when I speak to my curatorial teams and have spoken to many, many curators through my career, I always hear things like this. If people just read the story, they'd understand it, right? If people just read those labels. In my case, it's if people just watch the videos we made. There's this big, interesting and challenging piece of work, particularly now. People just get the facts. And these are complex things for us now, and I think this has become increasingly apparent in the last couple of years, last couple of months, last couple of days. Also, I've lived through this time when digital and physical and this awful word that someone, I think from the Rijksmuseum, presented at a paper in Museums and the Web a long, long time ago. Phygital. It's a terrible word. We should never use it. But that sort of division, I come from a period of time where digital and physical were separated, but if I speak to anyone below the age of, I don't know, 30, they're like, what do you mean? The digital is just IRL, right? There's not some separation, and that makes it kind of challenging for people who span those two generations. So as I was saying, I was involved in a lot of music things, and my other life in music events, parties and festivals, actually these temporal, ephemeral moments, these designed moments, these multisensorial moments, and importantly social moments, were really important in when I started work in museums. I started work through the IT department of the Powerhouse Museum. But because they knew I was heavily involved in the music scene in Sydney and would frequently gather 3,000 people in a warehouse on a Saturday night for 12 hours at a time, the Powerhouse had a really interesting collection. And in that collection, they had some very important early synthesizers and a very important early sampler as well. And what was interesting about the Powerhouse's collection was these instruments were never allowed to be turned on or played, because once they went into the museum's collection, They had to be preserved forever, which meant never plugging them in again. Yet the powerhouse also had violins that were like centuries old that needed to be played frequently for them not kind of to ever decay. Yet these very contemporary instruments, all kind of be at 50 years old now, were never allowed to be played. And that sort of stuck into my craw for a long time and drove a lot of my early thinking about making collections accessible and usable to as many people as possible. And one of the early projects, digital projects I worked on at the Powerhouse was one called Soundbite, which was about digitising the sounds of these old instruments so they could be played and used. This was about 2003, so 20 years ago. Of course, the world has been changing, and people started to begin to talk about the experience economy again. The experience economy term comes from the early 1990s. But in the museum world, this really started to happen in the late sort of 2000s. And it became really important to me in my museum practice that we talked about context and comfort. So this sort of notion of creating spaces through exhibitions and increasingly digital spaces too, where people could spend enough time with the ideas and the complexity of the institution and the complexity of the stories it held through its objects to be able to engage with them in ways that made things come to life and have meaning for them. So a lot of the work then became about slowing people down, and I now talk about not attention but focus, and this sort of sense that museum design and good curatorial practice has got to re-engage with context and comfort in order to slow kind of visitors down enough to restore visitors' focus. And we see this a lot. The very common thing that gets cut out of exhibitions still is seating. And obviously the most important thing in a museum exhibition isn't the objects, it's actually seats for like visitors. But exhibit designers still struggle with this, although I have to say it is getting better now. And it's important to create this comfort level for visitors in order to restore focus, particularly at a time when your focus is being grabbed by your phone all of the time. So when I think about restoring focus, I often think about this privileged position that museum and gallery experiences occupy in our world. Museums and galleries are by their nature multisensorial, and the exhibition is a really good way of controlling, to a degree, context. This, of course, a bit like journalism, has been disrupted by digital. But what got disrupted in the museum space wasn't the business model, at least not at first. What got disrupted was focus. And that happened, of course, before smartphones. Museum audience was always distracted. It'd be a kid asking their parent to do something else. It'd be another visitor talking loudly. But these were contained by the spatial design of an exhibition space. But post-smartphones, we began designing those spaces for the devices to be used simultaneously with a kind of visit. We designed exhibitions for kind of visitors to use their phones during them. This is a photo from the Powerhouse from 2009 when we rolled out an experiment with QR codes before the pandemic, before QR codes got associated with other things. And this was a terrible failure. But of course, we know that this design of spaces and design of media also is very much part of this same shift we've seen in sports broadcasting, right? So when you sit and watch the I guess here, baseball or college football. In my country, it's the cricket, or in Melbourne, the AFL, which is like, I guess, college football without any rules and without any protective cladding. It's kind of awesome, but anyway. Sports broadcasting now is where the broadcast is meant to be watched with a second screen, right? So you get your stats on your phone and the action plays out on the other screen, the bigger screen. So it's interesting now that we're seeing these shifts where media is being designed for multi-screen use, much as exhibitions are beginning to be designed for a distracted visitor. Or in the world of blockbuster movie multi-platform fandoms, the audience engagement plays out across multiple platforms and timelines. Dan Hill, who's now at the University of Melbourne, but when he was writing this, was working at the BBC and Nokia and Arup, was looking at the life cycle in 2006 of the TV series Lost, right? So this sort of sense that this goes through this sequence from the official trailer to fan culture, the US release, the DVD release, the blogging, etc., etc., etc. In 2006, this felt really, really new, but of course, this is now any large media property. And in recent years, museums, particularly the larger museums, have begun to try to be more like large media organisations, but of course without the staff, the budgets, and the ways and the ways of working. Working in this very multi-platform way is in fact really hard. So my work has been really a pushback on this and a return to this sort of sense of designing the spaces we can control. And slowing our visitors down and trying to explicitly design to restore focus. This is some work again that Dan Hill did some work with my teams when we were doing the redesign of the Australian Centre for the Moving Image around the way visitors interact with what at this point was going to be digital labels. So we were looking at this notion of, could you make museum labels different as digital experiences? So what if it was an e-ink label? And Dan came up with this really great typology of different ways that people look at labels. So the technological solution, replace labels with screens, was not actually helpful if you didn't consider the different ways that different visitor types, that would work for the solo visitor, but it wouldn't necessarily work for the large group, a school group, for example. So you have this sort of typology of the different user types. So that's been informing a lot of my practice, and some of the roots of that lie in the work done at the Cooper Hewitt, which I'll just cover briefly because it gives a good framing of things. Cooper Hewitt, New York, Carnegie's old mansion house, never designed to be a museum. Collection collected by the Hewitt sisters at the Cooper Union. And what's interesting about this collection, this is a photo from the 1920s. It was meant to be used. So this sort of sense that the museum's collection from its beginnings was there to inspire people, and it was there to be copied. This was about training the next sort of generation of great artisans, I guess, right? So this sort of sense of open access in an analogue way is deep in the museum's collection. Cooper Hewitt rebuilt from scratch. Cooper Hewitt, when I arrived, a very small amount of their collection did digitise. When I left, it was almost all done, which was excellent. And that created a challenge. What would a museum be like if the entire collection was digitised? And of course, the trouble when you put a museum's collection on the web is most of a museum's collection looks like this, right? No photo. The Cooper Hewitt had tens of thousands of prints, right? So prints a large part of their collection. And my colleague Aaron de Cope made this beautiful collections website that turns the collection metadata into sentences, right? So you could say, this is a print, we acquired it in 1901. And you could say it's resting in the storage facility too. But without the photo, that doesn't mean anything, right? There's a lot of other prints that could be. Digitisation, of course, created new visual metadata for those things. Of course, once you have that, you can, of course, sort by colour, and you can view the design collection by colour. So that was the sort of basis of what would you do to physically redesign the museum to take advantage of these new affordances that creating this new digital metadata would kind of do. Of course, we knew that at that time too, so we're talking the early 2010s, that everybody was funding audio guides. Audio guides were going to be the thing that would transform museums, despite them, of course, dating back to the 1940s. I think the first one was created in the Netherlands in about 1947. The challenge in any museum space, though, is this, that was written about by a writer in real life, that the technologies have a politics, and when you do these sorts of things, whatever technological choices you make, they have these impacts. And if you don't approach them with an awareness of those, you actually create these, in this case, political implications of the work. So we steered away, and I continue to steer away from the idea of locking away visitors in their own audio world. And you probably know this when you walk down the street and you don't speak to other people because they've got their AirPods in, right? So this shift to an AirPod society actually has political ramifications and social ramifications that this quote captures really well. And I keep reminding myself when I think about AI, and I speak to my staff and other museum people, all technology decisions have social and cultural dimensions. So, moving away from this idea of doing an audio guide in this fully digitised museum, we worked with local projects, and people came up, Jake Barton at Local Projects came up with this idea of a pen. This was a beautiful slide. This was a slide that was made a couple of nights before the pitch that Local Projects did with Dillis Video and Renfro. And this is like a early concept. But it's captured really well in this sense that the Cooper Hewitt work was about trying to get people away from their phones so they could engage with what the museum was about. Of course, making a pen is really hard, and that would be like making an e-book reader to force people to read more. And it doesn't always work. And of course, making things is super hard because you've got to think about things like this. And then when you've thought about things like this in physically designing stuff, so my team went off and worked with a firm in Spain and Taipei to make this thing, right? Don't do that. Don't make technology that's physical. Atoms are really hard. And then atoms need power, or machines need power, and then you have to get all the curators together to put the batteries in the pens. So this is us with the curators of the Cooper Hewitt labour. This is museum labour, filling the pens up for the first time with their batteries, which was a nice collective experience. 3,000 pens, that's a lot, right? Anyway, so where I am now, we evolved this idea. And again, this notion, and I'll just play this little video. So we have a thing called the lens, so we went from the pen to the lens. And this is what the lens does. of things going on in that. There's a huge amount of things going on in that. But at the end of the day, what we've done is given people a piece of cardboard to take home. And that piece of cardboard carries their entire visit with them. It's free. And what's useful about that is a number of things. It enables visitors to engage with what the museum is about, film, TV and video games, in a context where they're most kind of likely to go off and watch those film, TV and play those video games, which of course is at home. And it builds a bridge between the museum's visit, the physical experience of the museum visit, and this screen-based experience, which is what we want people to do when we go home. And one of the things that we talk a lot about with the curators too is the point of an exhibition at AUCMI is that visitors go home and watch their favourite show with new eyes and ears, or that they watch something else that's been recommended as a result of visiting the museum. And that's quite a different, I guess it's a new type of, a reframing of connoisseurship, right? That in fact the museum is making these recommendations and is providing the means to access those kind of recommendations. But it also allows within the museum space itself this refocusing. It refocuses the audience or the visitor within the museum space to concentrate on what's in it, but also refocuses the audience and the viewer when they go home. Again, slowing it down and restoring focus. And we will often talk about this sort of notion of valuing the time that visitors spend within the institution, right? So being a museum of time-based media, we need visitors to spend time with the works that we show. You can't just walk past a wall of screens like you might walk past a wall of paintings or a wall of or a showcase of artefacts, because the works change through time, of course, right? So in the redesign process, we worked with a firm called Second Story, and one of the slides that they made during their design process with us was this sort of sense of tracking a visitor's time spent throughout the institutional visit, and actually making it very clear to the museum staff that the design of the space and the technologies we used within it were in service of spending more time in particular things within the museum. So this is an exhibition we mounted about a year ago. So this was the first survey show of a UK collective called Marshmallow Laser Feast. They're an artist collective who make digital works, usually initially in VR. And those works, this particular one, Evolver, was used to be a VR experience, and we worked with them to make it gallery scale. And that gallery scale experience goes from you observing a tree in the way that trees photosynthesize, and then you become an oxygen molecule going inside a lung, and these sorts of things, and entering the bloodstream. This is also a technological process, so the exhibition design points to that. But what was different about this experience was we had everybody enter a meditative experience when they came into the gallery. So there was a 10-minute meditation experience that 99% of visitors did. And what was interesting about that was it slowed visitors down considerably. So it was about getting visitors into the right frame of mind to appreciate these works in more detail. And it was one of the things that the artists were very insistent upon, but also one of the things that we were very nervous about. That if, imagine you came to the museum with your kids and you had to sit through a 10-minute meditation. It was kind of implausible that it would work. But what was fascinating was I got letters sent to me from parents saying, I've never seen my kids be so attentive before. There was a really interesting piece around if you design with that commitment to shaping this experience, people will often go along with it and in really interesting ways. And it meant that people got a lot more out of the exhibition. You can see people here with their eyes closed. Remembering this is at the beginning of the exhibition. So museums are becoming less about things and the experience of things too. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this now. It does all loop back, so it's not just, it's not like the rambling bloodstream stuff here, but it might feel like that at the moment. So museums are becoming less about things, and I think working in a museum of screen culture, I'm intimately aware of that. This sort of sense, being a museum of media, lots of it made with software and with code. This also means we're a museum of incredibly fragile stuff. So when we commission, say, virtual reality experiences or mixed reality experiences, those are more fragile than, say, the celluloid we have in our collection. The celluloid we have in our collection in the right temperature controls can last about 75 years. I would be lucky to get 75 months out of a VR experience. It's because it's software and it requires software to run, and it's proprietary usually. My museum's also one that is, and I had this phrase, high capital creative works, comes from the screen financing part of government. They were like, oh, Seb, you run this museum that at its heart's about high capital creative works. So film production, TV production, video game production takes a huge amount of capital to make, and that's quite kind of different from a museum of other things. And our collection ranges from traditional museum things to video games. So this is a video game from the Jeff Minter, a UK video game designer. This was one made in the 80s, 1980s. This is one I had as a kid. Super cool game, by the way. But the celluloid collection is very fragile too. So we often encounter celluloid that looks like this. We have to digitise this. And we also have things like the sketchbooks of video game designers. This is a video game that's made in Melbourne that we made an exhibition of. And we also work with filmmakers to show their craft, right? So this is
really probably my favourite part of the exhibition. Over there we have Grace eating her Chico roll, and Grace is voiced by Sarah Snook. Standing next to her is her love interest Ken, voiced by the wonderful Tony Armstrong. And over here we have Pinky, who's played by the wonderful Jackie Weaver, who generously loaned us her voice. And this is Grace in her hoard. Grace is a hoarder. Every prop, set and character in the film has been handmade. There's no CGI, no AI. Everything you see is something real and tangible.
Oscar-nominated film Memoir of a Snail. So this hand-animated, stop-motion animated work, we have those on display now. We've also just closed an exhibition of that video game, that Melbourne-made video game, titled Goose Game. And you can see here that we're starting to make a digital work physical. Lots and lots of commissioned works of art. These are multi-channel video works through to little commissioned web games. Also, these quite amazing. This is Young Kim's delivery dancer arc Zero Receiver. So Young Kim makes these amazing works with stop motion, live action game engines and animation. This is a 30-minute piece. It's part of her delivery dancer series, which is in the Tate and many other collections too. But this is one that we commissioned, which again is pretty great.
이제 기억났어. 이 연속적 가능에 무한해서 나는 영원히 널.
So when we're trying to make sense of these works and preserve them, they're quite different to other things. This is a beautiful First Nations work done in conjunction with Ludo, who make Bluey. So Ludo kind of studio worked with these two sisters from Central Australia to tell their kind of story. And this work again takes artists who were working as painters and working with Ludo make animations. And all of these works now arrive on disk drives usually, or as files, right? So these digital files on digital storage formats are incredibly fragile. If we receive these on celluloid, these would be much, much more preservable. But as digital formats, they're really fragile. In the early 1990s, Australia was at the centre of what we called then net art and tactical media and new media art. And Julian Oliver, who's now New Zealand-based, used to be based in Berlin, but was in Melbourne when my museum was first created in 2002, built a fully realised virtual world that encompassed the museum and the public square it's in, and visitors could, this is before Second Life and before Facebook, visitors could go into the video game world here and also communicate between the video game world and the gallery space as well. So that's in 2003. That work we've just got running again with emulation, which is quite interesting, which I'll get to now. So of course, when you collect video games, in the olden days, Pac-Man might be collected like this, right? You would have the circuit board and controllers. Now about 1997, emulation of that software, or in this case the circuit board, became possible with software. So this is the first version of MAME, which is now called MESS. And MAME allows you to run lots and lots of different old video games and other tools within an environment. So what is the authentic presentation of a video game? So here's a video game that I grew up with in the, I think late 80s, early 90s, late 80s. This was a great racing game. You'll know what it is from the next screen. You could acquire the cabinet and you could maintain that cabinet to try to run it for a long time, but it would eventually break down. Now, if I go to the Internet Archive, of course, I can play that very same video game with its iconic music in my web browser with emulation. And this has started to move us away from the sense of what is the museum a museum of. We're now a museum of experiences, right? Or also within the Internet Archive, but also in many other places too, people have started creating museums of viruses, right? So one of the things that I was very excited about acquiring for the Smithsonian was a computer virus. It didn't get all of the way through for various political reasons, but I was also excited to see that the Internet Archive, of course, has the Malware Museum, which allows you to run old computer viruses within a browser environment and see what they might have done to your, in my case, my thesis when I was at uni was deleted by one of these. It evokes strong memories, anyway. Lots of things are becoming collectible, right? And so we've been working with universities to run, to collect and make old software run in these virtual environments within our collection system, right? So you can go to our website and you can now, in some cases, play some of the old Australian-made video games in your browser as if they were the same thing. Of course, they're not the same thing, but perhaps they are. And this is one of the complexities of what does this mean for museums? And sometimes this allows us to do new things. So this is a video game made in Melbourne, a very important video game of The Hobbit, right? So The Hobbit, this was one of the biggest selling Australian-made video games ever. So this is in the 1980s. And what we're seeing here is that we can start to pull apart the game And what's interesting about the Hobbit was it was the first game to actually have multiple non-player characters having their own autonomy within the game environment. So to interpret the game for display purposes, we actually want to show that. So people could play the game, but they could also see on a map where the computer was saying all of the other characters within the story were. So these new mediums and this new media requires new interpretive strategies to show what's actually special about it. This is creating software to display and exhibit software. And software is, of course, resistant to exhibition. And this is where I'll go back to the Cooper Hewitt experience briefly. So this was when we acquired this first app. So the first app that came into the Smithsonian collections was this app called Planetary. It came out in 2011. It was made for the iPad 1. And it was made by Bloom kind of studio. And what was interesting about Planetary, it was a visualization. It was a visualization of your own music collection. So it required a music collection for it to run. And it visualized your music library as a series of stars, who were artists, planetary systems, who were the albums, and the songs were the moons, right? So a nested system. It's quite elegant and quite a nice way of visualizing. And of course, the orbital lengths were the lengths of the tracks, right? Kind of cute. It's a music player app. So when we acquired that, we acquired that as the version source code. It couldn't run. You couldn't actually run it like this without having an old iPad and the old operating system that it was built in. By the time we acquired it, I think iOS, I think this was iOS 5, and it didn't run in iOS 7. So we acquired the source code, we released the source code. But what was interesting about that was it allowed us to show, and for future design historians to explore, what changed in each version of the software. Because the source code was, of course, the version source code. So this is a little bit like when you do an X-ray of a painting and you can see all the different layers the painter did and the different versions, the sketches. This is normal with software-based works. It's also normal with any, say, novel that's created by a writer within word processing software too. So theoretically, in a contemporary library collection, you might acquire a manuscript with all the versions, right back to the first words that were written and the words the editor took out. Of course, being at the Smithsonian and being an institution that was coming to terms with this, we had to print the source code out and it had to have a location on a shelf. So there it is in storage. And this is one of the challenges as we move to more software-based collections, is these metaphors of storage and shelves and the like become less relevant and more problematic. And again, I'd say that when culture and when our artefacts become digital, as we're seeing with the mass erasure of government websites now in this country, history becomes very fragile. What we were trying to do by doing this was to show that we wanted to show the work that the creators of Planetary had kind of done. And Ben kind of Cerveny talks a little bit about what they were trying to do now.
The idea that Planetary was visualizing a collection of music as a finite set of things is already nostalgic. And the way that now people relate to music is as a stream, an infinite oncoming stream of possibilities that they're moving through. And that was actually part of our planned evolution for the way Planetary would unfold, was that eventually we wanted to include a universe of music which was much larger than the sort of solar systems that were created by the individual artists in the collection. The idea of a high-resolution touchscreen that was at one's disposal for the browsing of media was still a science fiction. This was the very first. iPad 1 was a very science fiction experience for people. The idea that there was this window into digital media that they could pick up and, viscerally interact with. And so we really wanted to, sort of, in a way, Planetary was part of the completion of that science fiction story. I mean, what is it you're supposed to see on this? All of the science fiction programs we've seen previous to the introduction of the iPad, the thing you were looking at when you, picked up your little tablet that had a display on it was some sort of interplanetary sort of navigational system.
So capturing the context and the constraints was really important. And of course, acquiring this as software in 2014, Tom Carden was one of the original designers of Planetary. So 2018, Tom gets it running again. 2020, someone in Sydney, Australia, who I didn't know, got it working and re-released it on the App Store. So the museum object that we'd collected with its source code and open kind of sourced the source code so it could be preserved by a community of enthusiasts took about 6 years to turn around to become reality. And it was interesting at kind of the time when I left the Smithsonian at the end of 2015, in 2016, there was a lot of skepticism that this was an approach that was viable, that collecting and releasing source code was going to rely too much on a community to preserve it, to be reliable. Turns out it worked quite well in this case. And this is going to become more critical for us as museums, as I said, are becoming less about things. Because there's a lot of other things in our cultural memory that also don't fit nicely into what we do, cultural practices, but also as Shannon Matern says, there is a lot of cultural memory that doesn't fit on library shelves or city servers. Dance, ritual, cooking, sports, and data like shadows, wind, and rust. And so beneath all of this too, we should be picking up on some other critical challenges. How does the field learn and engage with the challenges of maintenance, the new types of skills and kind of literacies we need, and the new types of labour that will be deployed to preserve and maintain these systems? And my view is that getting the hands-on tools is critical to grapple with the grain of the mediums that we are increasingly working with. And I took these photos in the Bentley yesterday, and I kind of felt that these captured this really well, right? So in the preservation lab at the Bentley, there's this beautiful desk which is metal, and it's got these hammers next to it, and they use these hammers, and you can see the patina of use here from the hammers that have been used across many, many years, fixing in quotes books, and these brushes that are used to clean things. So moving to AI, which is obviously the thing that everybody is talking about at the moment. I come to AI through this background of software preservation, museum design, this sort of sense of getting hands on the tools. And so coming to the Australian Centre for the Moving Image in 2016, and actually the Cooper Hewitt work prior, and actually the Powerhouse work too, we've been working with tools and technologies that go back well before Gen AI, and we've been using computer vision since about 2016. But in 2022, there was a big shift with Gen AI, and so this sort of notion of how does a machine see and now hear what a museum is, what a museum collection is like, is of interest. So in 2007, some German artists made a fabulous video search site called 0x kind of DB, and 0xDB was an art project that took ripped DVD files from file sharing websites, actually from torrents, and took the subtitle file that was often shared with a torrented video file and built a database. And that database allowed you to search for when words appeared in that subtitle track and then pull up the frame of the video where that word was said. And this really inspired a lot of the work that we were trying to do around, well, what might be another way that we could do this? This is actually, I think this is from Madman Series 5, Episode 12, where the word museum is said by one of the characters. And what you can see here is this nice interface that allows you to browse this very large corpus of video. This again is mid-2000s. A couple of years later, the same interface was used for this big archive of Bollywood film that allowed people, again, this is before AI, before computer vision here. This was about browsing a collection of historic Bollywood films going all the way back to the 1920s. Again, nice example of data around that time. Similarly, artist Sam Levine, based in New York, made a tool called Videogrep, which was a video search tool in 2013, and released it with this little clip from a film called Time in Time with this actor, musician you may know.
I'm for a girlfriend. Besides, what's the hurry? I don't have time to gamble anymore. I can't take that much time. In real time.
Why do you think there are time zones? No one has to die before their time.
This was automatically creating a supercut of all of the times the word time was said within this film.
I had all that time.
Sam in 2022 released Videogrep 2, which allowed you to connect it to any YouTube video or YouTube playlist and automatically create these supercuts. So this is me, this is a recording of me speaking in New Zealand, and this is me saying the words museum, data, or change, and it again automatically created. Museum.
Change museum.
Museums. Museum. Change. Museum.
Change for change. Change.
Museum. Change. Org. Change. Museum. Change. Museums. Museum. Change. Museum. Etc. Computation allows this media to become incredibly remixable. Anastasios Germanidis in 2016 made this tool. He ripped all his DVDs in his film collection. Germanidis went on to make an AI tool called Runway ML, which is one of the AI video creation tools. This is an early piece that he did, which was looking at scene matching across his DVD collection. So all of the scenes set in a library, all of the scenes set on bridges, all of the scenes set on a beach, automatically using computer vision to identify these and create kind of visual supercuts. Again, all technology decisions have social and cultural dimensions, and we're not always aware of what they are when they happen. So skipping forward a couple of years, with my collection back home in Melbourne, this is what a computer sees a piece in our collection. Interestingly, this is very similar to a strip of film. What's occurring here is software is analysing each 30th frame, which gives us just enough resolution to make useful discovery tools whilst also keeping the computational costs down, which also means then energy costs down, which also means the environmental impacts of those energy choices down too. And you can now, this is a demo of what is now possible with machine kind of generated metadata. This is live on our website, on the museum's website. So this is the normal collection search. So you can search by collection of keywords. So here's a regular search for technology, and it will bring up, like any museum collection database, results where you can see things with the metadata, technology. But what about when the word technology is said? You can now search for that too, and it will now play you the moment from that piece of media from our collection where they're talking about it.
Technology is a pretty frightening thing because I don't think many journalists can say.
What you can also do, of course, computers hear things that are not just words, right? So now we're going to search for a dog, and what's been interesting here is it picks up the sound of a dog in the background here. So this is picked up a woman is singing and a dog is barking.
I came from Germany because we're living in Germany
dog in the
5 years.
And so this new metadata is being created consistently. I'm not sure what the singing is. I think it's the accent. And here is, of course, where the computer vision tool is seeing a dog. So here it's identified this scene at 50 seconds in is a man in a uniform is standing next to a helicopter with a dog on it. So this you can try on our website now. So it's using these new tools to show the collection in new ways and to make that more useful and accessible. But also there are politics in it too. And what I've shown you here looks like a very smooth experience. But of course, we've purposely made this a little janky so that you can see that this is machines doing this. You're not supposed to confuse this with accuracy. The woman singing is not actually a woman singing at all. And if you search for a cat, you will often also get a possum. But this from Tim kind of Sherritt and Mitchell Whitelaw is very important, particularly in this kind of day and age. And we've all grown up on, I imagine most of us have grown up on films from the 1970s, 80s and 90s and 2000s where the future is either Mad Max hellscape, possibly more likely now, or shiny chrome. And in fact, it's the seamfulness that is important. It's where you can see that the future isn't shiny chrome that is very, very critical. Of course, we're also, in most developed liberal democracies, we're also now living in low trust societies. This is actually the result of very, very specific political action, which you know about right now, because you're actually living it. This doesn't just happen. This happens because people make choices to erode trust. And that is complexified now by also what we sometimes call the polycrisis, so the environmental complexity of the world and more. And this is from 2024, so the Edelman Trust Barometer has been showing that there has been this big shift now, that people are feeling like technology changes too fast, we're not managing it well, and increasingly we've left them to market forces, in quotes, and people feel left behind. And those feelings and emotions are determining terrible political and social outcomes. As my friend and artist Anab Jain said, 10 years ago, we were in a period of protracted super-density, dystopia and chaos all at once. Museums have never been more important to help us make sense of the present and plan a better future. This is 10 years ago. I can't imagine what Anab would say now. I can actually, but I don't. Digital and technology and media is now bound up in systems that we are now more aware of and more concerned about. technology in museums, but also in culture as well, has moved from what I would describe as a cost centre. We used to think about technology in museum management as a cost centre to now a risk centre. So it's gone from being a benign annoyance, computers, the web, making websites, social media, we need to employ people for that. That's an annoyance, to a cost centre, to a risk centre now, where there is continuous cybersecurity risks, there's AI panics, and the bin fire of social media. So for the sector, what is the institutional role? What does this mean for the institutions we work in, we run, and we want to build careers in? Do we step in, step aside, stay out kind of side? My view is we need to step in, and we need to do this urgently. We need to see this in a challenge around, do we rebuild institutional trust, or do we need to build new institutional forms? We do have ways kind of forward, but we need to show that these are grounded in material realities, not in the abstracted realms of speculative finance and utopian kind of dreams. This is urgent work. We can't do this alone, we can only do this together, and I think now that might be the hardest kind of thing. And I'll leave kind of you with another Japan image. This is from Nikko, Edo Wonderland in Nikko. Thank you. I should give some context for this slide, actually, because it's a bit glib, actually, after all that. So the ninja maze, right? This has a ninja maze that's supposed to be really hard. It is really hard. So there's these exit points where you can give up an exit. Of course, we don't have that luxury. So happy to take questions. I know that was a bit kind of tentacular and all over the place, but hopefully there's some useful provocations in all of that.
Ricky and I have microphones. If anyone has a question, I'm happy to run over.
Is the ACME using generative AI in any way, shape, or form right now, or is it in future plans for your institution?
Yeah, we use Gen AI in a variety of ways. That search is using Gen AI tools. It's transcribed with locally running versions of Whisper. We use Llama 2 for some things. We do most of our stuff on-prem though. We don't send sensitive data or actually any data out to third-party services. So we've invested in having capabilities to do this in-house as much as humanly possible. We also show works by artists who are working with AI, with Gen AI tools, and we try to demystify those and raise for our visiting public some of the complexities around this. And while I've been here, in fact, I've had to respond to some letters from visitors who have been very concerned about what they thought was generative AI-made creative works, but actually weren't. So there's this sort of sense of what is the reality of this and what is the aesthetic of this now. So there's lots of... In a museum, it's screen culture, and a museum that's very much about the craft of making, the human crafts of making. These tensions are really, they're always in the work we do, and instead of shying away from that, we try to go with that and try to be a place where visitors can spend time with this work for long enough to try to come to their own senses of what it is and what is perhaps problematic about it.
Do you think that museums themselves are responsible for the erosion of trust, or do you think that it's mostly due to outside forces? And so it's like, are museums taking an active role in the erosion of trust, or are they more passive and have to respond?
Everything is implicated in the erosion of trust in a society, I think. But museums are not exempt from this, right? I don't think if museums are not actively working to rebuild trust, there's a bit of a problem. But there is a tension in the museum world around rebuilding institutions that we know are flawed. And I think, you know, we have lots of actions within museums to decolonise and many other things that show that the institutions are flawed, but also at the same time building new institutions isn't necessarily the way forward here. So it's this tension between, I think in the field, between burning it all down, starting again, that is you're learning is actually terrible. That's sort of left it, museums are not exempt from accelerationism is probably the shorthand version of saying this, right? So these things are not good. But I think my sense is museums still have a relatively high trust level from the public, and when we erode that trust, we need to do it in very conscious ways that help move an eroded trust back to a stronger, more resilient form of institution, perhaps. Does that make any sense? Okay. But I think it's really hard. Like I do think it's really hard. I think there was a symposium that I run on the future of arts, culture, and technology, and I was speaking with a First Nations artist at this symposium in the first kind of year, and they were very much like these institutions have never served our communities well. Why would we ever want to trust museums again? And we had an interesting discussion around, well, is it better to design for a low trust society where no one trusts each other and it's actually designed to hedge around trust? And that was in the context of technologies like the blockchain, which are specifically about you having a transactional relationship where you don't have to at all trust the other party. So there's politics in that, and if we live in a society where it's designed for low trust, you're not going to get a good community. Or do you design for a high trust society where you incentivise new forms of human kind of relations which are based on trust? Those are hard things they're not even, and they're sometimes a difficult sell to people and communities who have been let down over centuries. So that piece where technology and technologists will often come in with a solution for things, always be suspicious of the solutions. And I think that's where museums have got to go with these, got to get their hands on the tools a little bit and begin to show that solutions are flawed, and not only show themselves that solutionism is a flawed thing, but also work with their communities to have a more critical relationship to technology, media, and life, frankly. But that requires us to design spaces and experiences that, as I say, slow people down and are not replicating a media environment that's so much incentivized around either dopamine hits or shock, right? So how do you, in this high anxiety moment that we're in, how do you calm people down enough to engage with each other? And museums have a role in that. You know, museums are perhaps one of the few places where that is actually possible. But it requires intentional design and intentional practice to do it.
Is it on? Oh, yeah. Thank you. Thank you for this wonderful talk. I was really struck with your insistence on context and comfort. And then for me, then later on, attention opened up between context and the digital and artistic interventions that you showed that were all about decontextualization. So, if we focus on all the images of films where the beach is being shown or the bed is being made, and then that also goes very well with how you use on your own webpage the metadata. It's sort of, I think that is, as I understand it, the challenge of your institution, to sort of work through the decontextualization that's an everyday experience. Yeah. And then, so how do you bring the context back in to the fore?
That is the challenge of the work. I would also say that my museum is sort of the canary in the coal mine for every other museum type that's collecting contemporary anything. Contemporary culture is now digital. So if I go back to the early work I was doing at the Powerhouse with photographic collections, those were photographic negatives and photographic prints. Nowadays, our photos are in the cloud and accessed through these devices. So a contemporary photo history museum, or your family history and photos, is as decontextualizable as all of this, and recontextualizable too. And I think one of the things that we have these three principles for experience at kind of the museum that have come up in the last couple of years through a lot of the work. And those three principles that guide pretty much all the interpretive practice, and the front of house staff, and how we write about things is legible, memorable, and accessible. Or legible, accessible, memorable, right? So the legibility is legible to who? And as we've had a changing audience, as our I'm really proud of the reality that our museum gets is much more reflective of the diversity of our community than ever before, right? My museum gets an incredibly diverse, more diverse population visiting it than other institutions in our city. We get 1 million kind of visitors a year too, so it's a lot of folks. And a fair percentage of those, about 30% of those, are visitors who have never visited another museum or gallery before, right? So we can't assume that they come in with the same knowledge as everybody else, and we shouldn't, right? So the legibility challenge becomes harder and harder. And part of that, so legible, accessible, and memorable, the memorable piece is really key to this too. So you've seen with the lens and the pen that's really about scaffolding, tools for memorability, which implies that there's an intent for showing all of this stuff in the first place, which is, of course, what curation is about, right? So it's about making the practice of choosing, the practice of juxtaposition very legible to as broad a population of visitors as possible, and to reveal a craft in that and the craft of the makers of the original things. So when you decontextualize them, you're hopefully coming with an awareness that they did have a context before. And what's been interesting watching my children, who are now late sort of teens, early 20s, is I've lived through a period where memes, internet memes, which we collect as well, and I've seen other institutions try to collect too. Internet memes have gone from having a stable meaning to now having unstable meanings. And this is where you see, Pepe the Frog and other things go from having one meaning to a completely other to another meaning, and the irony, poisoning of youth culture now, where memes can have any meaning, is really reflective, I think, of the challenge of our politics at the moment too, right? So museums have a role in trying to create gravity wells around meaning that stabilise meaning enough to realise that meaning is contextual, and to complicate that enough that people feel more comfortable with that complexity. And I would say that was what was one of the really interesting outcomes from the visitor research that we were doing around the effect of this meditation experience, was that actually creating an environment that allowed people to slow down, allowed them to engage with these actually pretty complex works and the ideas within them much more effectively than if we just had this as a projection immersive experience. But it was, again, it's a luxury that museums have, I think, but it's a luxury that we need to make more use of, and we need to do it in a responsible way too. But you're completely right that, you know, the technologies, media technologies allow this remix and remaking that in the olden days, when I was growing up, and also as a music person, remix was something that I enjoyed doing, and, you know, doing all that stuff. Now all culture and meaning is remixable because it's become digital media. I think that creates a lot of tensions for the public and for us as a society.
Well, it's not quite like Cinderella's carriage turning into a pumpkin, but Uma does close at 8. So regrettably, we're going to have to bid you all a good evening. But before we do, I want to thank Seb Chan again for this illuminating talk, and all of you for joining us.
Thanks so much.